little bit of rain didn't help us much at all.
It did not.
Bob, where are you at right now?
Savannah, Georgia.
Nice.
Wow. Is it smog?
Hot and humid and windy.
Yeah.
I think there's a tropical depression off of the coast.
Yep.
Guess where it's headed?
I think so.
Yeah, head right towards you, isn't it? Yeah.
Where's your next stop?
It'll be St. Simon and then Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island.
Where's that at?
That's in Georgia.
Oh, okay.
And then Jacksonville, Florida.
Nice.
You're wearing your mask, right?
There you go.
This humidity and the heat and everything, it's a little hard to breathe.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yep.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I will call the special meeting of the Auburn City Council for September 5th, 2020 to order. And Sean, will you, well, first of all, the Auburn Special City Council meeting scheduled for Tuesday, September 15th, 2020 at 4 p.m. will be held virtually and telephonically. To attend the meeting virtually, please click the link or enter the meeting ID in the Zoom app. Per the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-28, the City of Auburn is prohibited from holding an in-person meeting at this time. City of Auburn Resolution number 5533 designates City of Auburn meeting locations for all council, board, and commission meetings as virtual. All meetings will be held virtually and telephonically until King County enters into phase 3 of Governor Inslee's Safe Start Washington's phased reopening plan. So, Sean, will you please call roll?
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember J-Raj.
I'm here.
Councilmember Malenga.
Here.
Councilmember Stearns.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
All right, so this is our second special council meeting that is dedicated to the 2021-2022 biennial budget. And I will turn it over to Finance Director Jamie Thomas for opening remarks and then to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're all set for another exciting day of budget talk. I'm going to be actually talking a little bit less today and tomorrow as we get more of the directors presenting their departments throughout the next couple of days. So I'm going to share my screen now and start the presentation from where we left off last week. So here's our schedule for today. We'll do some follow-up questions that we had remaining at the end of our meeting last week. And then we'll jump right into the general fund, the rest of the general funded departments, which includes finance, city attorney, community development, the police department, public works, and parks, art, and recreation. And then we will start with the internal service funds and information technology or innovation and technology will be kick us off for the internal service fund discussion. You may notice that this schedule is a little bit different from the one that I had originally shared last week. In an effort to make sure that you guys have enough time to hear from all of the general fund directors and really be able to go through all the general fund divisions within the general fund, I gave us a little bit more time to focus on general fund today. And we can condense some of our time tomorrow and not spend so much time with the proprietary fund and miscellaneous fund discussion. And tomorrow we'll pick up with the where we left off with internal service funds. So with that, there was two outstanding questions from last week's meeting. The first question we had was about the small changes. If we go to book 1, page 9 as a frame of reference, there had been a question underneath the medical insurance. It was one of the benefit lines, medical insurance, I'm using as an example, why we had these weird changes from year to year, like 32 cents in 2020 and then negative 40 cents in 2021. And the reason you're seeing that is when it comes to salaries, wages, and benefits, the only detail that you see in these budget books are manual adjustments that we're making. So this isn't the actual budget amounts, these are the manual adjustments. And since the program that we use that budgets for salary and benefits does not round, we have to make manual adjustments to round those benefits. So for instance, on that medical insurance line on page 9, you see 32 cents for 2020. And that's because the total budgeted amount for that year was $33,950.68. So we rounded up 32 cents to make that budgeted line rounded to the nearest whole dollar. And then the same thing is in 2021, we are rounding down 46 cents. So the budgeted amount for medical insurance will be $35,396 even. So that's not necessarily a change from year to year. Those are just the manual rounding adjustments that we make to those medical premiums. Did I explain that? It's kind of complicated to explain. Did I explain that clearly?
Yes. Jamie, thank you very much.
Councilmember Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you very much, Jamie, for your explanation. Then I have a follow-up question. The follow-up question is if we're just doing this manually for a few cents for the rounding up, why do we even put it on the budget?
It's the how the program works. So we have a couple of different modules. So we have our Eden is our financial system that we use for many different things. And with that Eden program, they have a budgeting module, and they also have what they call position budgeting module. And the position budgeting module is how we budget for salaries and benefits. And it's the detail that you're looking at is just a form. It's a report that you see. It's the manual budget report that we generate for all the departments. And since we're making manual, we have to make manual. Well, we don't have to, but we choose to make manual adjustments. So all of our budgeted figures are round. So whenever you ever run a report out of Eden to check our budget to actual for any account, the budget amount is always a rounded number. It's never to the cents. And so in order to get it rounded, we have to make these manual adjustments. We could exclude them. We could write we'd have to manually write our own report to exclude these manual adjustments though from the detail that you're looking at. So
Okay,
the short answer is it would create a special report for us to create on the back end to eliminate those manual adjustments from your view. And we just haven't done that.
I get it.
Okay.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So Jamie, follow up on that. So you mentioned approximately $36,000 for medical insurance for 2021. So is that the allocation that would be split out to various departments, or where does that number show?
So that would be, this is just for the council. So that
Oh, that's right. Okay.
That's just the council division.
Okay.
And when you see those benefits combined, well, it's actually all combined within the mayor and the council's budget. On page 8, you can see personnel benefits. And so the lion's share of those personnel benefits is medical insurance, but that does include the council's budget and the mayor's budget combined.
Okay. So a quick follow up on that then. So our total medical insurance, is that total number captured anywhere, or is it just broken down by department?
It is captured. We have all of that detail. It's summarized in this budget book. So
okay, great.
if you wanted to see a specific benefit, for a specific division, we can get you those totals. But that the budget book, if you can believe it, would be even bigger if we
Right.
included all of those numbers for every department. So if there was
Yeah.
something specific you see, we could get that information for you and send it out.
Yeah, I would be just interested in the total amount we're paying for medical insurance for the entire agency.
For the entire general fund or for the entire city?
For the entire city.
Okay, and realizing that that's in more than one, that's not just general fund dollars.
I agree, yes. We can, if you, I guess, break out the general fund from the other funds, that would be helpful as well. But just to have both together for an aggregate total.
Okay. Yep. We will get that to you.
Thank you.
Mhm. The second question from the first meeting had to do about the large increase, particularly in the IT internal service fund allocation to the city council's line. And the primary reason for that increase is, and we'll talk a little bit more later today, actually, how in the IT's internal service fund allocations are actually calculated. But for the most part, it's based on relative usage. In the past, the council's budget, when it came to internal service funds, was actually had a formula that reallocated some of those costs out across all departments. It's not necessarily transparent or the way that we treat any of the other divisions. So for the sake of consistency and transparency, we changed it this year where all of the council's internal service fund expenditures are actually accounted for in the council's budget rather than reallocating those costs out across the entire general fund. So what you're seeing is an increase so that means some departments and some divisions have actually decreased a little bit because they're not carrying the council's share of those internal service fund allocations.
Councilmember Beck.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Jamie, are you really saying that the council are really spending 30 to 35% more than what we did in the year before? And where were these costs accounted for before?
You're not spending more, you're spending, it's about the same. It increased commensurate with what the IT budget increased over 2020 to 2022. Your relative share hasn't changed. What we had done in prior years, though, is we had taken a portion of the council's budget, which included the internal service funds, and reallocated those out, similar to what we do for some of our administrative services for legal and accounting and HR. We divide out some of those internal service, what we call kind of internal allocation costs to other departments so they can help share in the cost. We had been doing that with the city council's internal service fund costs.
So where were these costs before?
They were being paid for by other divisions within the general fund.
So now it's just reflecting a true allocation from council and mayor budgets.
And you're happy with that, Mayor?
Well, it's a more accurate portrayal instead of lumping it in with other departments to take our costs. Yes, it's now allocated out appropriately to each department or division as it should be.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I want to make sure that I explain the concept of the internal service fund well, that their budget, we're going to be reviewing their budget so you can see what the IT's total budget is. Their budget is their budget based on their staffing costs, their software costs, their hardware costs, as well as infrastructure costs that they need to account for. And that total amount gets allocated across the general fund regardless. I mean, it's still 100% of that budget's going to get allocated out across the entire general fund. The general fund's going to pay for all of it one way or the other. It's just how we break up that pie within the different divisions.
So theoretically, then we should see a reduction in other areas, right, where these costs were shown before.
Correct, but also remember that although it's a relatively big increase for the council's division, most all of the divisions are pretty large, so that $76,000 spread across all the other divisions ends up being smaller on a smaller relative decrease, but that's also offset by a general overall increase to the total IT budget for 21 and 22. Because like all of our departments are the costs are increasing because it's driven by salary and benefits mostly. So the overall IT budget has increased. It's going to be really hard to see that decrease because it's being offset by a general overall increase as well.
Well, if it's hard to see, we're kind of taking this on faith, because if you can't see it and it's not obvious, then it's suspicious. So that's all I'm saying.
Councilmember Baggett,
Yes.
I'm not sure what you're thinking is suspicious. This is an allocation. This is similar to, you worked at Boeing, so shared services. There was allocation paid per desk to the shared services group. This is similar to what is being paid to IT and other departments. There is a shared allocation based on employees per department or per division that goes, because we are expecting support from IT. There are things that IT will purchase that are going to benefit each department. And so the allocation comes from the budget of that department to pay into the fund so that IT can use that budget to do what is beneficial for each of our departments. So
when I said suspicious, when you look at a number that goes from 23,000 or 24,000 to 74,000 or 75,000, and then the following year after that goes up to over 100,000, I mean, that's the suspicious part. Okay, so it begs a question, and Jamie has explained it, I believe. So I think we'll just have to wait and go through the other departments here and see how it fares out.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is that in the prior years, the council's allocation was held artificially low, while other departments had an artificially high allocation. And if after you've gone through all of the other departments, you're not seeing how the numbers tie out, we do have, it's a series of multiple spreadsheets, but we could try to summarize, well, we can get the summarized worksheet where you can see exactly how the council's allocation breaks down relative to all of the other departments and divisions as well.
Yeah, I just don't want to beat a dead horse here, but like the old expression goes, if you, when the horse is dead, the jock dismounts. I really don't understand why it's such a large allocation to the 7 council members and the mayor's office. It just, to me, when you've got several other people working in these other departments, I would think the spread would be more towards them, perhaps as it has in the past, than it would be to the council and the mayor.
Councilmember Baggett, when we get to each one of those departments, you will see a large allocation for IT from each department. In the past, the other departments have taken the hit for us in some regards, and we are now deciding that the appropriate allocation is to be from each department as it accurately should be portrayed.
Okay, well, let's proceed. I just thought it was awfully high for the number of people that were actually benefiting from the services, but let's go ahead. I don't want to be delaying the process.
Well, first of all, maybe I should ask, how many people do you think are being served by that number?
Well, there's 7 council members plus the mayor and the mayor's staff. So do the numbers. There's not that many people in there.
And the overall IT budget is large. And actually, I think the benefit is that Director Travis will be presenting tonight, and I believe that Ashley will also be on the call tonight too. So if you have some really specific questions, they could answer those specifically towards the end of the meeting as well.
And
Okay.
Councilmember Brown has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to hopefully finish off this piece, would it be accurate to say that the cost for IT is more accurately being portrayed in this budget than we have seen in prior budgets?
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have your hand up?
I did. So could we get a breakdown of what as councils are benefiting out of that? Is that what exactly are we benefiting by? What are we receiving from IT? I know that we have them help us out with our.
The fact that you are on this Zoom call today is part of what IT allocations go to pay for, the technology that is throughout our city. The fact that you have technology, right? Your iPad, your iPhone, your desk phone right now, access the storage of data within our system. All of those things and so much more that Director Travis can explain later on, but it's not just when you call and ask for help at the help desk. That's not what this allocation is for. It is for all of the technology that you have access to and utilize throughout the course of a year.
Thank you. I'll wait to hear the report further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I'm going to jump right into following up with our general fund department discussion, and finance is the first department up for the day. So I will talk a little bit about our finance department budget and what we do. So to go to the details, I'm not going to go page by page, but finance, the finance division starts on page 55 of book 1, and that starts with the org chart. In general, the general fund piece that finance serves is financial planning and accounting and finance. Our financial planning division does all of our budget, all our budget work, our capital work, grants, our capital, our 6-year capital plan, as well as monitoring our budget to actual performance. So they also help put together and monitor all the quarterly financial reports that we put together and go out to the council on a quarterly basis. And they make sure that what's actually happening in the city is in alignment with what we had budgeted and what we had intended to happen. The accounting and finance group is really kind of split into 2 pieces, which is our financial operations, which is payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable. And then we also have the financial reporting piece, which is our comprehensive annual financial report. So, and then audits, being the audit liaison when the state auditor's office comes in and they're auditing our comprehensive annual financial reports. And then additional services include our banking and treasury functions, debt management, asset management, all of our investments, and our bond issuances, all of those things, plus many more. But in a nutshell, those are all the things that the general fund services that finance helps support. For our 2019-2020 accomplishments, really keeping it focused on high level accomplishments that we've had over the year, I think, or over the last year and a half, 2 years, we really had worked towards working with Burke Consulting. We wanted to take a deep dive at looking at our long-term fiscal sustainability policy, as well as what does our long-term fiscal situation look like at the city. And they helped us identify some of our key challenges and some revenue options for us to consider. So as far as a goal moving forward, I really feel like half the work is done there. The other half is actually getting our fiscal sustainability policy finalized and in place. So those are our goals moving forward. Accomplishments, another accomplishment that we had actually was more of an accomplishment. It was not necessarily planned. It was planned, but it became much more of a necessity when we had some turnover in payroll. And with that turnover, we were able to take advantage of really streamlining a lot of our processes. So eliminating redundancies, looking at the process, the entire payroll process, and streamlining it, making it more efficient, reducing a lot of paperwork. And we want to move into kind of the next phase in an electronic records management system and getting a lot of the paper documents that we still have and getting those digitized. And looking into 21-22, expanding the work that we've done currently with payroll and applying that to accounts payable and accounts receivable and our financial accounting, like our journal entries as well. We're such a paper-driven department, and there's so much more efficiencies. We can do things quicker, we can do things more better, more efficiently if we can look at our processes, streamline them, remove the redundancy, and then get our documents digitized and eliminate a lot of the paper. And a lot of the work is already begun, just with the fact that a lot of us are working from home, and we've had to start thinking about our processes and already identifying some of the redundancies and identifying better ways we can do things better. So those are our major accomplishments and goals for the finance department. If you look at our budget, our numbers, we have very little change from the 2020 adopted budget into the 2021 and 2022 preliminary budgets. Most all of our changes are attributed to salaries, benefits, and interfund charges. But perhaps the biggest impact to the increases that we see in 21 and 22 are a result of our new program request, which is the B&O tax specialist. And that is tied to the B&O tax program that we're recommending for the 21-22 budget. So the new program request for the tax specialist includes $150,000 in the 2021 budget, and then $300,500 in the 2021 budget. That's actually for two new positions. That includes the tax specialist into 2021, as well as an economic development position to help really kind of be a liaison between the city and the businesses, particularly as the businesses are transitioning to a B&O tax, kind of a secondary customer service base, and working with the business community and helping them be connected with the resources and information in the city as they navigate a new B&O tax in the city. So those two new costs then would be offset by $4.8 million in new revenue that would begin in 2022. And then I've prepared a couple B&O tax slides because I have a feeling that there's probably a lot of questions about the B&O tax. Most of this information should be refresher, although there is a lot of information and it's been several months since the last time we talked about this. I thought that I would just reshare it all again. So this is all this information that I'm presenting today is information that we reviewed back in March at our council retreat. So in order for us to get a business and occupation tax in place, so we've been talking about it a lot. I think we're getting close to going on to the next stages. First, we would need to have a council adopted budget that adopts a budget with the B&O tax in it. And then we would need a separate ordinance that the council adopts. And what this ordinance would, the framework of this ordinance would follow the state's model B&O tax ordinance. And what the state's model B&O tax ordinance is, has a lot of mandatory pieces that the state requires cities to have within their ordinance if we are in fact going to be taking advantage of a B&O tax. Most of the model ordinance language, the mandatory model ordinance language, centers around legal definitions and defining business activity and identifying whether or not a business has nexus within a certain location. And nexus, some of you may know what nexus is determining at which point the taxable, which location the taxable sales belong in. So if I'm doing business in Auburn and Kent, does the sales tax or does the B&O tax or does the taxable activity belong to Auburn or does it belong to Kent? So that's the whole concept behind Nexus, is depending on the type of activity that the business is engaging in, depending on the point of sale or whether it's destination based, the model ordinance defines where that nexus is. So businesses aren't paying business and occupation tax to two different cities for the same revenue. Left in that ordinance that we will adopt, or you will adopt, I don't adopt, but what you will adopt is really a lot of discretion. You guys are left with a lot of discretion. So you would approve the rates that we set for all the different activities. So each industry, we have to identify a rate for each industry, can't exceed 0.2% per industry. We would identify exemptions for gross receipts thresholds. That's the threshold limits that we had talked about in order to protect small businesses. So whether or not we want to have zero threshold, so everybody generating revenue in Auburn pays tax, or whether or not we set a $250,000 gross receipt threshold, $500,000, $1 million, really we can set that threshold wherever we want. And really the main objective behind that would be protecting the businesses that we want to help grow without penalizing them. We also would identify any exemptions for certain types of business activities. I've listed a few of the common exemptions that some cities have opted to take, whether it's liquor, beer, real estate, rentals and leases, farm products grown and sold by the farmer. That's usually, those are activities that you usually see with like your farmers market type activities. So a lot of the vendors that are engaging in activity at the farmers market would be exempt, albeit those sales are usually not hitting a threshold of anywhere near $250,000 or $500,000, but it would still offer them further exemption protection. And then nonprofit childcare is another example. You could have deduction for certain activities. So credits or bad debt issued by sellers, that's a common exemption or a common deduction that cities could provide for. But again, it's all up to our discretion when we are building the ordinance. And then some cities have also opted to develop credits really as incentives to bring and retain and attract new business in the city. And so a lot of times that comes in the form of a new business tax credit, whether you are giving them a credit for the number of employees that they have and that they're employing within the city, or whether or not you're just going to give them a credit for a certain amount of for the first amount of revenue that they generate or the first number of years. Again, that tax credit can be structured any way that you would want it to look.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I was wondering, so that second bullet point under city discretion is the exemption level. And so I'm just, it seems like, you know, depending on that particular threshold that we choose, I mean, that would affect a lot of the others. Is that correct?
A lot of the other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, deductions, so resale or wholesale delivered outside the city. You know, if it's a small business, you know, it might have one level of service. If it's a really large one like Amazon, it might have another. So, you know, I guess what I'm wondering is if we set a certain level, you can help us sort of analyze the impacts of
Yep.
setting like, you know, $1 million level or a $100,000 level.
Yep, and actually, if we're talking about revenue impacts, that's going to be my next slide. I wasn't sure if you meant that if we set that those gross receipt threshold exemptions, if that affects the other types of exemptions.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'll give you an example. So, I mean, these are just, you know, assume they're not really, they're just sort of random. But say we set a gross receipts threshold of like $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then right underneath that, you have an exemption for certain types of, you know, businesses, liquor. So maybe it turns out there are no liquor stores that make more than $1 million. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
So that could very well be the case. And so there may be some businesses that are exempt for just the gross receipt threshold, or there might be a business that doesn't necessarily get exempt from the gross receipts threshold, but they're exempt for another reason, or sometimes they're exempt for multiple reasons. But in either case, they only have to meet one of those criteria. If they're exempt for any of those reasons, they wouldn't need to file and report anything. And as long as they're filing and reporting, then there's going to be certain activities. So some businesses might have multiple types of revenue sources and revenue streams. And then they would be looking at the deductions for activities. So let's say they did $1 million in activity, but only 500,000 of it, $500,000 of that activity was deductible. So when they're filing, they would report the million, deduct 500,000, and then calculate their tax based on the remaining $500,000.
Okay, great,
So
thank you.
that's a very simplistic explanation of it, but yeah, people, they could be exempt for multiple reasons. And if that's the case, they just don't file and report at all.
Okay, that's really helpful, thanks.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. So Jamie, I guess timeframe wise, so in looking at a potential adoption of a B&O ordinance, are we looking at doing that concurrently with the adoption of the biennial budget? Or are we kind of looking at as a separate factor for that? And also, are you looking at providing additional session or sessions related to us looking at potential, the potential B&O tax?
So we could adopt the ordinance concurrently. My concern is that I think that there's still a lot of business outreach that we want to do first. And outreach, I think education a lot, I think is the center point there, is making sure that businesses understand why the council is considering this, and really explaining more the impacts and really the exemptions and deductions that you're considering before we actually adopt an ordinance, and kind of doing that outreach simultaneously with crafting that ordinance, which then answers your second question. I do anticipate having at least one study session where I bring the model ordinance with our pieces filled out for you guys to review, to question. We can discuss modifications, and then maybe come back for a second or third review before we actually ask for adoption.
So just a quick follow-up then. So in the outreach to the business community, would you be looking at some sort of direction from council, like on the threshold limits, revenue limits at that time, or have discussions with the business community first, get their input, bring that back to council so we can consider what they're bringing to the table?
Well, I think it's always good to let the business community know what we're considering, what are some of the options that council is considering, get their feedback. I have a feeling that we would probably be able to take a lot of their input into consideration before making a decision. That always, it helps them feel like they've been heard. I think you mentioned this last week, prior to making a decision, whether we're not able to implement everything that they've recommended or everything that they've asked for, at least we've actually heard them, and before we make a final decision. I think taking to them the options that we're considering would probably be the best first step, and then move forward from there. And then as a decision's made, as an ordinance has been adopted, then that's when we do a whole nother round of outreach with even more businesses, explaining to them what the ordinance is and the impacts to their businesses. Okay,
then real quickly. So when we're looking at the adoption of ordinances again, and of course with our budget, we're in September, we have a short time to go before the end of the year. I don't recall how close to the end of the year do we actually do the adoption of the formal adoption of the biennial budget?
Would be I believe it is in mid-November right now, is on our calendar.
Okay, so we've got less time to kind of prepare for this, to do all of the aspects of a B&O tax, including outreach. So our time is going to be really, I guess you might say, really against this year to move forward on this.
Yeah, and the legally binding legislation would be the actual B&O ordinance itself. So
Okay.
you could adopt this budget that assumes a B&O tax, but that doesn't give us legislative authority to start implementing a B&O tax until you've actually adopted the B&O tax ordinance.
So with the adoption, could we add the elements of that after adoption of the ordinance? So for example, setting the threshold, setting the like for warehousing, how much we want to charge for warehousing, can we do that after the adoption of the ordinance?
Yeah. Well, you can always amend the ordinance. So you would want to adopt the B&O tax ordinance with kind of what the rates and the thresholds that you want for planning purposes. That doesn't mean we couldn't come back and amend it. I would imagine in the first year or two, we're probably going to amend it several times, just as we start finding businesses that we hadn't originally thought of when we first put the ordinance together, and we're going to be getting questions, well, what about me and my activity? And we're going to need to add provisions into our ordinance to address those. Every business is so unique that we will probably need to be making a lot of amendments along the way to accommodate those questions and those unique businesses. Sure.
And at our budget retreat, you gave us a briefing on how many businesses would be affected at the various threshold levels. It would be good to have an update on that. So when we're looking at how we establish thresholds, which and who may be affected by that within the realm of which business we're looking at.
Yep, and that's my next slide.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Baggett has a question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Deputy Mayor DeCoursey kind of hit on it briefly, but I remember that when the council reviewed a lot of this B&O tax possibility, we were all polled about suggestions about where we would tack on the B&O tax and for what kind of organizations. And I think that many of the council members came up with one form or another for warehouses. And I was just wondering if warehousing is involved in this, because, you know, if I recall correctly, that the rates we were talking about there for warehousing was based on a per square footage basis and not based upon retail or wholesale sales or anything like that. Have we calculated or figured in anything here for warehousing at all?
Yes, and we have to. So if you're going to have a B&O tax, you do have to establish a tax rate for all of the primary business types, essentially, that is set forth in the model ordinance. And that's retailing, services, manufacturing, wholesaling, and other. There's like a printing services that falls under the other category. So wholesaling is very clearly a category that we would establish a rate for, and that's part of all of our assumptions and our calculations.
Well, warehousing doesn't really fall under that category, I don't believe, and I think that
warehousing, warehousing isn't isn't a category, but warehousing, if you have a warehouse, most businesses operating out of a warehouse are engaging in wholesaling activity. So, and I think where your question may be coming from is from, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, is we've talked in the past that warehouses in general don't produce as much revenue as other activity. And that is just true for when you're talking of the wholesaling category, because they are operating the way the types of businesses operating out of warehouses are engaging in wholesaling activity. And based on the deduction model, the model ordinance requires that everything that is essentially sold out of a warehouse gets deducted, provided that those sales are leaving the city. And so then there's the idea that they're not paying their fair share of a B&O tax.
Well, their products are normally coming in one door and going out the other, and correct. I don't know that they're quantifiable enough to come up with any kind of equitable percentage or anything. I see that 0.2%, but I think the city of Kent, if I'm not mistaken, does apply their B&O tax to warehousing based on a square footage basis.
Yeah, so there's two different things. So the first part is because of the type, like you had meant, like you said, the product comes in, it goes out, it just kind of visits the city of Auburn for a little bit before it leaves, and there is no taxability or nexus to the city of Auburn. So there's very
but they're using our streets, they're using our highways. We're not getting any benefit from a lot of that.
Absolutely. So they're paying a very small B&O tax amount. We can't charge more than that 0.2%. So the other side to that is what we would call a square footage fee, and that's what both the city of Bellevue and the city of Kent do. And that would be kind of a way to.
So you're saying that they don't charge more than 0.2%?
Correct. They can't. So they have a separate fee. So
they can't apply that to the square footage of the warehousing, right?
But they do. So it's not. So the square footage fee is actually a fee, not a B&O tax.
I see. Okay. Well, whatever we want to call it, it's still a fee or a tax that the city is not benefiting from. And I think that we need to make sure that we do consider that, because warehousing is one of the big things in our city that is not paying their fair share based upon the use of the facilities in our city. And I think that we need to make that a little more fair and equitable for the city. I know that's, I know that's kind of it'll be a touchy subject, but it would allow us to recover more money for that service, which they're not paying anything for now. And maybe it would lighten the load for some of these other businesses, so they wouldn't have to pay a larger share.
You're right. And not on the next slide, but the slide after that, I have some analysis on a square footage fee too, and what that would bring into the city. So
good. I will be patient.
We're already thinking about that.
All righty, good. Thank you.
All right. Are there any more questions at the point where we are right now before we let Jamie move forward? Okay. Thank you, Jamie.
So this next slide just shows some different ways we could structure our rates. Of course, the options are infinite. I only have a couple of options here. These are the same options that you've seen a couple of times, both in the Burke study as well as the council retreat back in March. The number that I have here, the $3.2 million to $4.1 million, is assuming we match Kent's rates, and we have a threshold of $250,000. So as you can see, there's other cities that are actually more aggressive with their rates. So if we actually increased the rate, we could increase the rate and increase the threshold like the city of Shoreline has, and that would generate about almost the exact same amount of revenue. So just that's kind of how it would look playing with the rates versus playing with thresholds, and the kind of revenue that it would generate. That's the table that you see along the bottom there. The numbers that we're using, they're based on gross income figures that we received from the Department of Revenue. We do not get business specific data from the Department of Revenue. They give us business counts, industry, and the business counts by industry, as well as gross and taxable revenue by industry. So that's where our estimates are coming from when we're doing this. It's just based on those very high level counts from the Department of Revenue. As an example, using Kent's rates, if we were matching Kent's rates, a retail business generating $1.5 million in gross sales would pay $690 a year in B&O tax. A service provider, and now this assumes 100% of the business and the services that they're providing are taking place in Auburn. When it comes to service, it gets a little bit more convoluted or complex in how they calculate what they call their apportionment of B&O tax. So for this purpose, we're just assuming 100% of their business activity is taking place in Auburn and they're generating $500,000 in gross revenue, they would pay $760 a year. So those are kind of ballpark. I mean, that's just kind of give you a really rough scale idea of what two kinds of businesses would be paying and the rates that I have highlighted below. For frame of reference, about 45% of the business, also not only the business count, but also the revenue generated in Auburn is retail. So the lion's share of the activity that's taking place in Auburn is retail. 31% is wholesale. So to Councilmember Baggett's point, that those wholesaling activities in those warehouses make up a very large portion of the economic activity that takes place in Auburn, and we want to make sure that we are getting their fair share of the benefits that they're receiving by being able to do business in Auburn. Services make up about 15% of the businesses and revenue generated, and manufacturing, there's only 3.8% of the businesses that are manufacturers, but they account for 10% of the revenue, the gross revenue generated in Auburn. Any questions about this slide? Okay.
Jamie.
Deputy Mayor.
Jamie, okay. Thank you, Mayor. Jamie, so just to clarify, when we're talking the wholesaling, or in times past, we've lumped it warehousing, manufacturing, and storage. Imposing a B&O tax and or the fee, will we looking at a B&O tax plus a fee, square footage fee, or a square footage fee in lieu of a B&O tax?
We could do it both ways.
Okay.
What we may want to consider is because manufacturing ends up contributing a pretty significant portion of B&O tax revenue just based on their revenue. I wouldn't necessarily we might want to consider whether or not we wanted to also assess a square footage fee for manufacturing activities. Okay. What we could do is perhaps create a square footage fee for particular types of for very specific activities like warehousing or wholesaling. So, and in that case, they could pay both. In my experience, wholesalers just end up paying a very, very small amount of B&O tax at the end of the day.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So,
Jamie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, could you bring that slide back up? What is the other?
It's anything that doesn't fall into those other categories. So printing services, let me pull up the model ordinance really quick. So it could be like maybe certain, well, that would be software, that would be services. I'm off the top of my head, I'm not able to think of any other. I'll write it down. You'd be surprised though, as we start drilling down into the actual business activity or the actual businesses that are in Auburn, how many odd businesses you wouldn't have ever thought of before. So I will get some examples.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so this slide really more compares, if we were to play with the thresholds a little bit. If we had a $250,000 threshold, we would have, in total, we have 5,788 businesses in Auburn. If we reduced the threshold to a $250,000 minimum, of those 5788 businesses, only 1,468 would be subject to the B&O tax. It would, now it says reduce tax collected by $996,000. That's assuming we didn't have any threshold at all. That's not based on our assumptions on the prior page, because on the previous slide, I was assuming a $250,000 threshold. That's just to order of magnitude. It's showing you that the business is not paying the remaining 3,300 businesses contribute $996,000. So you eliminate a lot of businesses and it's very little tax. That's because 17% of the businesses in Auburn would generate about 81% of the total B&O tax. So it's really those large businesses that are paying most of that B&O tax. It's not the little businesses. If we added a $500,000 threshold, we would now be down to only 991 businesses that would be subject to B&O tax. And it would lower, the tax would be reduced by $1.5 million. Again, assuming we had no threshold at all. And then this is where I added the square footage fee for wholesaling activity. In our kind of just our projections that we did based on the number of warehousing space that we have in the city of Auburn, and assuming that we did a 10 cent per square foot fee, we would generate about $2.3 million a year to help supplement the B&O tax revenue that we receive. So a wholesaler with a 50,000 square foot wholesale space would pay about $5,000 a year. So that was all of my B&O information that I had prepared for this evening in slide format. So before I jumped into the next section of my budget presentation, did you have any questions about B&O tax or square footage tax? Comments?
Any questions, council? Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Jamie, I think it would be helpful if the last slide or the slide before that and this one, if you could just send us these slides just so we have it in front of us, so it would be really good.
I'll send you the whole slide deck.
Right, perfect, thank you.
And if you still have your budget retreat binder from March, there's all of this information plus a little bit more under the B&O tax tab in that binder, if you're using them as decorative bookends somewhere in your house. Okay, I'm going to move on to another portion of the general fund budget, which is book 1, page 67. And this is what we call the non-departmental fund. And really it's just a bunch of activity that we don't really attribute to any one division or department throughout the city, but it is in its general fund responsibility. So in 2021, we have $3.9 million in budgeted expenditures in the non-departmental division. The activity that we pay for out of the non-departmental division is left medical premiums, long-term healthcare insurance for left retirees, fire pension, our fire pension insurance premium, our AVHS fees, some miscellaneous debt service for our cemetery fund, and it's also where we budget for salary contingencies, which is actually what's driving the budget highlight. The budget highlights, we had a very large decrease that we're budgeting for in 2021 of $472,000. And that is because as we went into the 2019-2020 budget, we had unsettled contracts. And so we had to budget. We were budgeting for kind of just a contingency. We didn't know what our union contracts were going to be. So that's where we budgeted for some contingency on those salaries. So we wouldn't have to come back for a very large budget request increase in the middle of contract negotiation. So because most all of our large contracts are set through 2022, we were able to reduce our salary contingencies pretty significantly in 2021 and 2022. And then that's partially offset by the increased left one benefits, particularly it says medical benefits, but the biggest increases are in the long-term healthcare costs for those left one retirees. So that is the non-departmental division. Any questions about that? So I'm going to hand this over now to Director Como in the City Attorney's Office, and she's going to talk about her department and her budget in the general fund.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. I am presenting on behalf of the City Attorney's Office, and we are a department that is created by state statute. So just to orient you on the work that we're doing, under RCW 3523-111, the City Attorney advises the city authorities in all legal matters pertaining to the business of the city, and we approve all ordinances to form. We represent the city in all actions brought by or against the city or against city officials in their official capacity. So as part of the City Attorney's Office, we have 16 full-time employees budgeted for. I will provide a high-level overview of the 3 divisions that comprise the City Attorney's Office, which we often refer to as the legal department. I'll note our accomplishments and goals, and then I'll discuss the proposed budget for 2021 and 2022. So beginning with the civil division, you'll see in your binder that we review draft resolutions and approve ordinances to form. In 2019, we reviewed and finalized 77 resolutions, 39 ordinances. And in 2020, that number was 75 resolutions and 40 ordinances. Consistent with the statute that I cited, we advise the city authorities in all legal matters. And so we've handled obviously a number of civil lawsuits for the city. Our goals moving into 2021 and 2022 are to improve electronic processing of legislation and contracts, to make sure that both publicly and internally we have access to those final signed documents. This serves the city's transparency goals and helps us to be more efficient in renewing or working on future legislation and contracts. The next division is the criminal prosecution division. We handle all misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. You'll see in your binder the number of cases that we opened in the last budget cycle. The rough estimate for this year on criminal hearings attended through the end of last month was 4,000. The total number of criminal hearings in 2019 was 10,000, just over 10,000. We have had less hearings because of COVID and the temporary court closures, but we do expect to have more hearings in the coming fall. Our goals in the criminal division are to continue forging relationships with our domestic violence community advocates and service providers. We endeavor to work with our city and county partners along with the Public Defender's Office to assist with launching the Auburn Community Court and to provide diversion opportunities coupled with matching individuals with necessary resources. So we're continuing to engage in that work with the mayor's office and the court with King County operations. And then in the city clerk's office, we handle our public records requests, normally passports, although those are suspended during COVID right now because we can't have customer facing operations. And we handle many of the payments for fees such as dangerous dog registrations and providing just general customer service. Year to date, we've responded to and closed almost 3,000 public records requests. We've staffed over 50 public meetings, including many for the City Council. We have created an open public meeting and Public Records Act training for council, all boards, and all commissions this year. And our goal is to move to a broader public records training for all staff, and again, continuing to move forward with electronic records management, as I mentioned previously. For our budget, we have no proposed changes to service levels or programs. There is no substantial change in the budget request. The increase that you see is due largely to salaries and the interfund service changes. And with that, I am available if any council member has any questions.
Questions, council? Does not sound like there are any questions, Kendra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I'm going to pass it again to Director Tate to talk about community development.
Good evening, council. Just real quick, as the slide indicates, I want to orient you to page 93 of the book 1 of the general fund. And my presentation, I just want to call out a few items that I think are pretty notable, because our philosophy in this approach has been to try to keep our costs relatively the same as the prior budget that we're currently operating under. But first of all, on page 93, there's the organization chart. And I just want to call out 2 items on the organization chart. One is that you'll see to the far right that SKIP is identified, so South King Housing and Homelessness Partners, and the 1.75 employees that are part of SKIP. So you heard from Angela last night, and then the employee that will be hired as well. So that needs to have a place somewhere in the organization chart because of Auburn being the administering agency. And also I want to point out that community services is also shown in the organizational chart. And I just mentioned this because that change occurred and was moved into the community development department at the beginning of 2019. So if you were looking at a prior budget, you wouldn't have seen that area reflected in our organizational chart. The department's budget is divided into a number of different areas, and those are covered on pages 105 through 125. And I'm just going to say real kind of a basic overview of each one. First, we have a building department budget, which is really to pay for third-party inspection services if we need that, code enforcement abatement, downtown enhancements, outreach, and education. That in addition to the basic supplies and training costs and things of that nature. We also have an environmental services budget, which is where we help pay for maintenance of the Auburn Environmental Park, mitigation and monitoring requirements that the city has, technical services, participation in flood insurance programs, and things of that nature. The community services budget funds community outreach, the Civics Academy, and National Night Out, programs like that. There's one called Planning and Administration, which doesn't have a whole lot in it for the work that the employees do, but it's a place that we hold, or we have a placeholder for memberships to organizations like Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and the Puget Sound Regional Council and RIA 9 and SKIP. We also have planning services budget, which includes hearing examiner costs, the facade improvement program, and our long-range planning services. We have a public health budget, which is where you find human service grant funding, and we'll talk about that in a second, and community grants. And then the last budget area is the SKIP budget, which is really primarily a placeholder for the administrative expenses. And recall that 9 cities in the county pay into that fund to reimburse those costs. For 2021-2022 budget, again, trying to stay pretty budget neutral, not including salaries and medical benefits and insurance benefits, since we don't really control those costs, but our basic operating budget staying neutral across all of those budgets. And there's just one exception, and that's a program improvement that we're seeking, which is to increase the human services grant funding budget from $490,000 to $600,000. And for council members that were in their seat in 2019, you may recall that City Council adopted a resolution, which is Resolution 5479, adopted in December, which endorses the need to increase the human services funding line item because it had remained at $490,000 since 2011. So we can talk more about that program improvement if there are questions about that. But kind of moving along, want to highlight our 2019 and 2020 accomplishments. There's several that are noted in the budget, but the ones that I want to call out are that we completed a significant permit system upgrade that enables us to move to a cloud-based system and that enables online permit submittals, online permit payments, and electronic plan review. Some questions were asked earlier about, IT. And that's an area where, we can't do that without IT to go through those significant software upgrades. Another electronic or digital feature that we launched was a system called Bluebeam. We launched that back in early 2019, which allows the city to move documents and plan sheets back and forth between the customer and city staff when we're doing the review. It's an immense time saver. We no longer have to write letters for every single thing that we're reviewing. And if you can imagine, a plan set for a new school is 200 sheets. Writing a letter describing where your comment applies within that 200 sheet plan set is very difficult. It takes a lot of time, and now we can just put it on the plan sheets and move electronically back and forth. So the customer loves it. It's easy for us. It's a real efficiency saver. We also shifted our housing home repair program to one that relied exclusively on outside contractors to complete all of the jobs, to one where we have a hired staff person who's going out and doing home repair, certain types of home repair projects like building ramps. And in fact, I think we provided some images of some ramp improvements that we just made on a home, just as an example. And then we outsourced the specialized work like electrical work. So by making this change, we've been able to increase the number of housing home repair jobs that we can do in a given year by 25%, because we can move really nimble on each of the projects. And we only do little jobs, so it's hard to get contractors interested in little jobs. Also, this council in 2020 was able to kind of finalize the last pieces of a significant city floodplain management development regulation update that's synced up with FEMA's new floodplain maps. So that was a big deal. And we completed a community rating survey, a very intensive process where a third party evaluates our flood regulations. And we were basically rewarded at the outcome of that for a 25% discount on all flood insurance premiums in the city of Auburn. We adopted healthy housing standards. That was significant. Increases the ability to ensure that multifamily properties are kept in better shape than what the prior minimum standards were. So it benefits the community and the tenants. And then a couple successful years of Civics Academy, which produced more than 40 graduates. We funded 51 human services grants agencies in our community, completed 120 housing home repair projects, helped launch SKIP, more than 1,000 new business license applications, more than 6,000 permits, more than 12,000 inspections, and more than 2,000 code enforcement cases. So kind of by the numbers type stuff. Key goals moving forward in the next 2 years. One is to join the eCity Gov Alliance. And council may recall that you authorized a contract with mybuildingpermit.com and the eCity Gov Alliance a couple months ago, which allows us to participate with a number of other cities to create a common portal for permit applicants that means that all builders will see the same interface and have the same process when they're interacting with one city to the next. So that's a big deal for us to launch that next year. Pursuant to state law, we'll be required to implement a new business license interface that connects the city's application renewal process with the state's process and system through the State Department of Revenue. We have to carry out a comprehensive plan update by June 1st of 2023. And even though that's in the next year after this budget cycle, the heavy lift will really occur next year and in 2022. So that's reevaluating growth scenarios, zoning and density policies, determining availability of land to accommodate mandated growth targets. We have to do that both in Pierce County and King County. And when we're doing that, we have to update the land use element, the housing element, the utilities, capital facilities, economic development, and parks. So it's, even though the community development department, it's a central piece for us, it involves a lot of departments to participate in that update. And we're also working through developing a digital civics academy in order to make that available to more residents at more frequent intervals and at their convenience, and continuing to provide support to standing up the community court and the Auburn Resource Center. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I am going to say that on the slide that you're looking at, you'll see that there's a pretty significant budget decrease, and I'm sure that that begs a question. I'm just going to call out a few things that contribute to that. One is that we moved a position out of the department and over into mayor's office, which is the position that Kent Hay fills. So that's where you see like a balance. It goes out of one department, it goes into another. We also had a grant that the Department of Commerce provided. That was an $80,000 grant. So that's reflected in the prior budget, and it doesn't carry into the next budget. So that's why you'll see a reduction there. We've also, this one's kind of tricky. We had processed a program improvement to carry forward facade improvement funds from prior years that hadn't been used. So you'll see that as a decrease because the budget went up, and now it's kind of resetting and going back down because the annual budget for the facade improvement program it's $100,000, and that budget that program improvement had been 130. So it kind of made the budget for 2020 to look like a $230,000 line item when in fact it was really just carry forward money. So it's those kinds of things that cause it to look like there's a significant reduction, but some of it is moving money around into different areas of the bigger city budget. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jeff, Council? Apparently not. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, so next is going to be Chief O'Neill to talk about the police department.
Chief, if you are on, you are muted right now.
Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council. The Auburn Police Department is responsible for all the public safety in the city of Auburn, the protection of life and property, and addressing quality of life concerns for all of our citizens so we can enjoy a safe and crime-free community. We currently have 140 full-time employees, 119 of them are commissioned, and 21 of them are non-commissioned positions. We currently have 6 officers in the academy, 2 on FTO, 3 commissioned vacancies, 2 frozen supernumerary positions, and 1 frozen records manager position. We're currently in the process of hiring an additional records specialist. The police department over the last 4 years responds to an average of 88,759 calls for service each year, which is an average of 745 calls per commissioned officer. The police department's made up of 3 divisions: the patrol division, investigations, and administrative services. I could draw your attention to the organizational chart that's included in the budget book. You'll notice that we have reorganized our administrative services division this year. We did that, 1, to accommodate a frozen position for the records manager, which is going to remain frozen through 2021 and 2022. Those duties have been split between the records supervisor and the administrative services commander. We also moved a sergeant out of a training position and made that an officer position so that we can assign a sergeant to our community response team and bikes. We also added a position in the community response team so that we can increase the level of services that we're providing at the community level. Next, while we have many accomplishments that are listed in the budget, I'd like to draw attention to the goal that we had of applying for accreditation and reaccrediting every 4 years. We recently had our on-site evaluation 2 weeks ago. That went very well. And the next step in that process now is to have our accreditation records approved by the WASPIC Executive Board. Another goal that we had in 2019 and 2020 was to develop our supervisors and leadership team by ensuring that all members of our leadership team attend an advanced leadership course. I can report that to date, every member of our leadership team from sergeant and above has attended an advanced leadership course, and 2 sergeants that we're going to promote October 1st have already started attending a 3-week course so that they'll be ahead of the game by the time they actually get promoted. In 2021 and 2022, we are going to focus on officer wellness. We're going to review our current programs and research new innovative programs that are being implemented across the country to improve the overall mental and physical wellness of police employees. We are also going to help promote inclusiveness within the department, examining our hiring practices, community-based programs, and departmental operations. We will attempt to identify areas of concern and implement changes to address them. When it comes to our budget for 2021 and 2022, we have a savings of $229,000 in 2021. That is coming from a supernumerary position that is going to remain frozen, and records manager position that we're going to leave frozen and continue to transfer those duties to the administrative services commander. In 2022, we're going to have a $1.3 million budget increase. A large portion of that is going to come from the Valleycom contract cost, which are projected to increase by $175,000 in 2022. We're looking at 2 new programs, which are going to be funded by IT and equipment rentals. One of those programs is $35,000 for a Spillman contractor. Spillman is the records management system that we use for police. And currently, when we have an issue or a problem that we ask our IT department to resolve for us, they have to call Spillman and then wait in a queue until enough people across the country want to make that change. If enough agencies across the country think that change is important enough, then it can be implemented and happen. By hiring a contractor that can do this for us, they can make those changes almost instantaneously, and they provide us personalized services instead of being part of a nationwide process. The other request that we're asking is the SWAT van is at the end of its current service life. We have $336,000 in the replacement funds for that vehicle. Based on the operational changes and the way SWAT teams have progressed in the area, there is no longer a need for a new command vehicle. It's more appropriate to replace that vehicle with individualized vehicles for each of our 6 SWAT team members. So the cost of those 6 vehicles is $464,000. To supplement that $128,000, we're going to use the funds from our drug seizure fund, and then we're going to have a increase of $69,000 in 2022 that will be added to the replacement cost account for those vehicles, which will be on an 8-year rotation. The next cycle that we have is SCORE. There's going to be a 10% increase in 2021 for $420,000 and a 10% increase in 2022 for $520,000. The reason for these increases is that there's 11% decrease from contract cities. And while most cities are seeing a decrease in their average daily population, Auburn has had an increase of 32%, which means Auburn's relative share of owner cost are increasing from 36% to 46% in 2021.
Councilmember Brown has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, just going back to that last slide where we noted the Spillman support contract for $35,000. Will you see any sort of a comparable reduction in interdepartment savings from IT?
I believe these funds are going to be shared with IT in order to fund that.
Okay, thanks.
I think, Councilmember Brown, was your question more if there's less work required on IT's end to support police, then would police expect to see a reduced cost in their internal service fund charges in the future?
That's correct.
Okay. It may result in that. Generally speaking, though, IT can talk about it a little bit more later. Usually that cost allocation for support is based on the number of employees and the number of FTEs in a department, not based on actual support time dedicated. So they likely won't see a change in their IT allocations in the future.
There is a small change for 21 and 22. However, it is that reduced IT interfund charge. And so 2020 is 1.7 million, 2021 is 1.6 million.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a relatively de minimis amount, but thanks.
That's on page 142.
So then the last part of the general fund for the police budget is the drug forfeiture fund. As noted in our program improvement for the take-home car or the individual SWAT vehicles, there'll be an increase of $64,000 from that budget in 2021, and then we will have a savings of $136,000 in 2022. The big change is $128,120 that'll go towards those 6 SWAT vehicles to replace the SWAT command rig. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any other questions?
Any questions, Council? Councilmember Trout-Manuel?
Chief O'Neill, you mentioned that these cars are going to be going home. Will that increase the insurance on them taking them home?
I do not believe so. I believe that the insurance is spread evenly across the entire fleet. So I don't think that should be a increase in insurance cost.
Okay. And then you mentioned that they were going to be receiving leadership training. How long is this? How many hours or days is this leadership training that they're going to be taking? And how many of them?
Yeah, there's one of 3 leadership courses that we send the members of our leadership team to. They're either the International Association Chiefs of Police Leadership and Police Organizations course, which is 120 hours, or the West Point Model of Leadership, which is 120 hours. And now the newest one, it's a brand new program. We have 2 new sergeants that are in the pilot course for it. It is also 120 hours. but it's spread out over 1 week each month for 3 consecutive months.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, a couple, I think maybe 3 things for me. One is you're maintaining the number of FTEs through 2022. You mentioned the number of calls per officer. How do we compare with the number of calls per officer to our neighboring cities?
On average, our officers take 100 calls per officer, more than the next closest city in the valley. And I believe the next closest city in the valley is Kent.
Okay. So in relation to that, and I understand where we all are budget-wise, but the need for officers on patrol on the streets, do we need to look at potentially here of increasing the number of officers and to reduce the number of calls per officer, or are they able to handle the workload?
Well, given the constraints in the budget, we have looked at some alternatives to try and reduce that call load. And one of those alternatives is utilizing our online reporting system and referring calls that are appropriate for it to online reporting instead of having an officer respond and take that report in person.
Okay. For your major goals for 21 and 22, I'm very pleased to see this, but you mentioned that the APD will aggressively explore innovative methods of policing. Can you give us some indication of what you may be looking at, and how is the new advisory board potentially folded into that?
Yeah, so some of the things that we're looking at are, again, the online reporting system that we used. There's also a model that's growing in the region that we're using where loss prevention officers, for example, at Walmart or Safeway or some of our other big retailers are able to contact people for shoplifting, for an example. They are then able to write their own report and forward it directly to the prosecutor's office. So those are for low-level misdemeanors that don't necessarily need a police officer to respond and contact the shoplifter. They can write their statement themselves and send it to the prosecutor's office.
Really, really good. And then lastly for me, on the 6 SWAT vehicles, do those vehicles have any special features? I know when we have the rig, it's pretty much a full-blown vehicle with all the bells and whistles. Are these vehicles any different than a normal squad car?
No, they'll be the same as a normal patrol vehicle. They will, the individual SWAT team members, though, will have all their equipment right there in the vehicle, and it'll increase community safety because they'll be able to respond directly from their residence to the scene of an incident instead of needing to come to the station first and then all rally with the SWAT command vehicle, which has all their equipment.
Okay. And are we still involved in regional SWAT activities?
We're part of the Valley SWAT team, and that's
Right.
comprised of 6 Valley cities, and each agency provides 6 members and 1 commander.
So what will, I guess my question then, I would assume then that these officers who have the individual SWAT vehicles will be part of that response team?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Malinga.
Yeah, it's a general question, I think, for all the departments or just for finance. How are the cost of living increases for the FTE handled? What percentage do we use and how do we determine that? Is there any cost of living increase for employees?
It follows our contracted what's in our union contracts. So different contracts have different increases. We have some contracts that have smaller increases, but multiple times throughout the year. And then we have other contracts that have larger increases that occur just at the beginning of the year. And then our unaffiliated staff just follow the increases from those bargaining contracts. So that's how we budget for increases. It's driven by the contract.
Okay. So do we do set asides in the budget for that, even though we haven't negotiated the contracts yet? Is there, how do we, do you, I mean,
Yeah,
how do you
so
incorporate the budget? How do you anticipate for that?
Yep. So fortunately for this budget cycle, we've got budget contracts established for all of our police groups through 2022. So we already have our contracts established. Our Teamsters do expire at the end of 2021. So we do have a small contingency that we budget for. I had mentioned that in the non-departmental fund, that's where we have a small set aside, just kind of assuming that it follows the historical increases. It all depends. In prior years, we didn't have contracts that were negotiated for through both of the years, so we had to budget for a larger contingency. What will happen, it has happened in the past, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. I did have one more question. This is related to our 2019-2020 goals and the progress. And this is for the consultant we had working on the space planning for the APD facility. And I know we're on hold right now because of the pandemic. When, and I answer my own question somewhat, I know after pandemic, but when do we think we might be able to get back on board with this as we start coming out of the pandemic?
Dan, would you like me to take that?
Yeah, Ingrid, if you could, I think.
Sure. So the facility master planning project, we're still working on pieces of it, but it has changed a little bit with the direction of how we want to look at both the police as well as maintenance and operations going forward, knowing our budget issues that we have. And so we are hoping to come back to the council this fall with the next discussion, probably actually in December with the next discussion, with the intent of kind of wrapping that plan up in early 2021.
Great, thank you, Ingrid.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Yes, Dan, I was just wondering, my last question is, since the climate of the Black Lives Matters, and was there going to be any further training on mental health, or are you planning on adding anything like that for further training for our police officers?
Yeah, so currently the state requires that that 25% of all law enforcement officers that are working on the streets attend a 40-hour crisis intervention training course. In Auburn, we require that all of our commissioned officers attend the 40-hour crisis intervention training course. Unfortunately, with the COVID crisis that hit, those courses have been canceled in 2020. We're hoping that they will be back online in 2021 or move to a virtual platform. As soon as that occurs, we will get all of our commissioned officers that have not attended that to that training. Additionally, there is a 2-hour online CIT refresher that is required for all commissioned officers that we are in the process of completing now. That usually gets completed in the second half of the year. And then we also have de-escalation training that is a part of our defensive tactics and our mock scenes that we do at the end of the year. And in October, we will be sending 4 of our defensive tactic instructors to Eugene, Oregon to attend a force science de-escalation instructor course.
Thank you. That's great information to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Moving on.
All right, so with that, Director Gaub will talk about Public Works.
All right, good evening. So if I can orient you, so we're going to be starting on book 1, page 159. And the first thing you're going to notice is that that is our entire Public Works Department org chart. And tonight, we're only going to talk about a portion of the work that Public Works does. So you may recall that Public Works is funded by about 7 different fund sources. General fund is only one of those fund sources. And what that general fund does for Public Works is it funds a portion of our engineering services and then our street and vegetation division within M&O. So for our engineering programs, this really means that this is our transportation and our right-of-way management. It's our permitting and development that we do related to transportation, and then general permitting for public right-of-way. It's our traffic signal operations and maintenance, and then it's the general fund portions of our survey services and our capital project support and our contract administration for projects that are not utility or airport or other fund sources, special revenues that don't pay for those staff. And then one other thing that I wanted to point out, because it is a little different and a little bit more unusual for Public Works than for the other departments. So in your budget book on page 166, you'll see that we identify 55 FTEs for the engineering services. However, we don't fund 55 FTEs out of the general fund. Most of those positions are actually funded by the utilities, as well as our capital project funds. And that's important because I'm going to talk about that as we get down into the budget changes. And then for our street and vegetation division for M&O, this basically does all of our maintenance on our transportation systems with the exception of the traffic signals. So they do our signs, our lights, our guardrails, pavement management, sidewalk repair, and then vegetation does all of the management of the vegetation along our public roads, including our street sweeping, roadside mowing, ditches, and this group also does some of our vegetation management for our storm facilities. However, that portion of their work is actually funded by storm, so it's not included in the general fund budget that we're going to be talking about tonight. And then lastly, for our street staff, the other thing that they do that's fairly significant for the city is they are our first responders when it comes to inclement weather response or accident response or any kind of emergency response. They are generally the first group that responds to that unless it is specifically related to water, sewer, or storm. So with that, we want to talk a little bit about our accomplishments for 2019-2020 and our goals as we go forward. Again, these are just specific to the general fund portions of our budget. So I'm not going to talk about the utilities or the airport or fleet tonight. And so in 2019 and 2020, we were awarded 8 transportation grants totaling about $5.84 million for transportation projects. And also during the biennium, we reached a goal of the 70 PCI for our street system as an overall goal for the average condition of our streets. That's both great for the overall condition of our streets. However, we have an issue with our arterial streets in that they're only at an average of 63 in our condition rating, and our local streets are actually at a 77. So we've got a little work to do on our arterial streets. Our local streets are doing really well. We also completed several different traffic calming improvements. However, in 2019, however, in 2020, we did have to suspend that program because of resource issues related to COVID and the frozen positions that we have within our department, as well as we reduced some of the work in our streets division this year because of the COVID and the the resource reductions that we have. For highlights as we go forward into 21 and 22, we are looking at revamping how we do our traffic calming program because of the amount of resources that that current program takes. With the actions of COVID, we've realized we need to relook at that and figure out how to make that a more efficient, more effective program. In addition, as we talked about at the council retreat in March, one of the other efforts that we'll be working on in the biennium is looking at photo enforcement to determine if that's something that the city wants to consider going forward from a traffic calming assistance program. And this is a joint effort with police to look at how that program might help us attain some of that traffic calming needs within our city. And then we also, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we have the comp plan update coming up. And so a large portion of what we'll need to do is the transportation comp plan update. So budget highlights for engineering. So on the screen in front of you, you'll see a fairly large negative number for engineering. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that tonight so that you understand how we actually allocate out our engineering staff. Because we are a mixture of general fund, utility funds, and then capital funds, we actually relook at how that allocation is done every 2 years to determine if that allocation needs to change between all the fund sources that we have and what areas we are supporting during the next 2-year cycle. Specifically, that's related to our capital project staff, of which about 30 of those 55 FTEs have some element of capital projects that they work on and support. And so depending upon what the capital projects are for the upcoming 2-year cycle, that will change that allocation of their staff salaries, which is why you see a reduction here. What you'll see corresponding with that tomorrow with all of our other funds is you'll see an increase in utility funds and special revenue funds for where we expect those project costs for those project funded staff to go. So that's the significant change that has happened there. And then we have a new program request within the engineering group, and that is for our survey equipment upgrade. So our current survey equipment is anywhere from 10 to 12 years old. The software for that equipment is already not supported, and we are expecting that the equipment itself will not be supported in the next biennium, which means that we really need to look at upgrading and replacing that equipment so that we can continue to maintain the services that we provide both for our capital projects and completing the survey work, as well as the work that we provide for other departments related to boundary surveys, as well as determining where the right-of-way lines are as we're working through issues with property owners. So that's an effort that we do on a daily basis. And so we need to replace that equipment so that we can stay current and consistent. Next slide. Okay, so for the streets, we really didn't see much change in the streets. The change that you see in the budget is really related to salaries and benefits. We're maintaining our service levels back to what we were pre-COVID in what we have identified in there. And that's really kind of the summary of streets. I guess I will make one point in there just so that council is aware. Within the street budget, there's about $700,000 of that street budget that is actually the cost for the electricity for all of our street light and traffic signals. And that 700,000 is a reduced number from previous years because of the LED retrofit program that we're in the middle of completing right now. Any questions?
Councilmember J. Rogers asked a question.
Thank you. Ingrid, a couple of questions. With the arterial, you said we haven't done too much work on those. With the budget constraints, how are you going to go forward with that next year?
So we've done significant amount of work on our arterials. The difficulty is that it's probably not enough to continue to try to maintain them and get them up to a 70. And that's probably part of the discussion for tomorrow as we talk through the capital program parts. But right now, the way that we fund our arterial preservation program is that's that 1% utility tax that goes towards that. That generates about $1.5 million to $1.75 million a year. And then we use those funds to leverage that against getting grants for doing additional preservation. So for the last few years, we've actually spent closer to $3 to $4 million a year, if not more, on our preservation program because we've been able to leverage the money we do have for grants. But I want to caution the council that that's not something that we can count on forever as we go forward. So it's definitely something that needs to be discussed with council sometime probably in the next biennium for how are we going to look at improving the revenues for that preservation program.
Okay. Now, my next question is the traffic cameras that you were talking about.
Photo enforcement.
So, yes. How are we going to fund that?
So part of the process of doing a photo enforcement program is that you are generating revenue because you're issuing tickets through that photo enforcement that it should be paying for that program. So there's not necessarily an outstanding cost to the city. There's a cost that we would pay to a vendor on a monthly basis, but the revenue coming in should more than offset the city's cost for that. And that's part of what we're evaluating right now with the police department and other agencies that currently have photo enforcement. And I do want to point out that there are two types of photo enforcement that we can do. There is the speed enforcement within school zones, which is a location that police spend a lot of time addressing comments and complaints from citizens to try to address the speeding in those school zones. And then there's the red light photo enforcement, which is the more controversial part of photo enforcement.
So that would, if somebody violates the red light photo enforcement, the ticket automatically goes to them, right? And they would have to pay or go to court.
Not necessarily. So the process does require that police review the video to determine whether that is a ticket that should be made or not. And once they make that determination, then the ticket is sent to the individual. And then, yes, they have the option to pay. They have the option to go to court. I'm not certain if Dan has any other information on kind of what those next steps are.
I think it's sent to the registered owner of the vehicle, not
Correct.
necessarily the driver, because there is no allowance for facial photo.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your answer, Ingrid. Appreciate it.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a point of information for our new council members. We did have red light enforcement in the city. Previous council decided to eliminate that. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, Ingrid, we only had that at 4 intersections throughout the city. And it was not every light in the main corridor, like of Auburn Way, north or south.
Yeah, I believe it was actually 3 intersections, and I believe we had 6 school zones total that we had photo enforcement for previously. And I think in the discussion so far, I think one thing that would definitely help us on traffic calming and on police enforcement issues and resources is that enforcement within the school speed zones.
Great, thank you. And I guess a question for Chief O'Neill with this. So if we go back and implement this again, either way, it's a police officer's time to review the videos, to do the paperwork, and to have the I guess the red light camera company send out the notices on that. So what additional burden, if any, does that place on the police department?
So what they were able to do in the past is through the funding of the program, a traffic officer does it a couple hours a week on overtime before or after their shift. Or when it's possible, we shift those responsibilities to an officer that's on light duty. So somebody who's injured that can't go out in the field and perform their normal everyday duties.
Great. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay. So if we're done with Public Works, I am going to pass it off to the last General Fund Director, Director Faber.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me? No.
No.
I'm not sure why that is. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. Parks, Arts, and Recreation, and I'm on book number 1. The org chart is on page 181, and a similar presentation to our other directors that have just gone through this. Our department is comprised of a senior center, the Arts and Events Arena, which also controls the Auburn Ave Theater, recreation programs that control the community center, teen center, all of our rentals, both indoor and outdoor. Our museum, which also includes the Mary Olson Farm. Our maintenance division, which has 34 parks and many beautification areas around the town. as well as our golf course. So if you're on page 181, there's only one change to the org chart, and that is a resource navigation program coordinator out of the senior center. We were fortunate to receive $1.6 million through the King County Veteran Human Service and Senior Center levy for a social worker that we're have one in our department. We also oversee one that serves Algona Pacific and Auburn. So that's the only change to the org chart over the previous year. I'll go over a few of our accomplishments and goals, beginning with the Arts and Events Division. You saw a few of those last night at the council meeting, which are really excited. We've begun the process of renovating the historic downtown post office into a new arts and culture center. We were also purchased the theater in the last 2 years, so we control our destiny as it relates to the performing arts as well. And we've created a large community artwork project, the crow that you see at Lescove Park, as well as many other installations downtown, and began work on the Auburn Arts Alley. Next year, we're really excited about completing construction on the first floor of the Arts and Events Center, as well as looking at ways to expand our sponsorships for our outstanding community events, such as the Veterans Day Parade, Pet Palooza, and all the fun things that go on in Auburn. Out at our golf course, we've really done a lot to improve the guest experience, such as adding a Golf Genius software program where when people host tournaments there, they can go on their phone and see them and their competition scores live as they go along in their round. We've also, for the 5th consecutive year, added over 1,000 tons of sand to the fairways, making the course much more playable in the shoulder months of October, November, and March, April. And that's made a big difference in how many rounds we're able to get out of the golf course. We've also designed forward tees to increase the pace of play, which are great with young kids and older seniors who still want to keep their golf game alive. So we've had some great successes out at the golf course. And next year, we're really going to try to focus on increasing youth and equity programs at the golf course and outreach to some of the populations that haven't gone out there, whether it's a cost prohibitor or perhaps they're just not used to playing the game of golf in their cultures. So we're going to work with our recreation division and do some outreach to those populations, as well as continuing our sanding program, which we think is the most beneficial thing we've been doing out there. At the Senior Center, a couple of great accomplishments, as I mentioned before, was receiving the King County Human Services grant. That outreach to shut-ins and others has been really important, especially now during this COVID time. There's just so many people that aren't able to get to our services that we're able to go and find out what help they may need, as well as creating a new data system in all of our programs so that we can better understand who's using our facilities and who's not using them, and for what reason. So we're hopefully going to be able to target our populations a little better and find out what's restricting some people from using our programs. Last year, we had over 300,000 guests in our programs, and that's not including any drop-in users of parks. So we're super popular, but we want to make sure that everybody knows about us and that there's nothing that's stopping them from coming. A couple of the other things at the Senior Center beyond the grant is they're working on an inclusion plan. We've started some programs there where certain days, certain nationalities are coming down because they know the meal that day is perhaps going to be something they're comfortable with. And they then find out that other people are comfortable with the same food, and we're going to expand on those programs as well. And also through COVID, we've started a large virtual program in our recreation division, both at the Senior Center, in fitness, and in recreation. And even when COVID ends, we want to make sure that we don't lose that that touch on the community for those who don't have the time or the wherewithal to come down to our facilities that we have. One of the other things that we're doing is we have a goal of increasing or getting our recreation revenue and participation back to the 2019 level. This year has actually been a huge struggle for us when it comes to wedding receptions, participation, summer camps. And so we got to gear back up, and we're staying in touch with our populations along the way here. And hopefully this comes to an end soon. Out at the White River Valley Museum and the Mary Olson Farm, we converted the old storage garage into a beautiful new classroom last year with a grant from the state. And that was recently completed, and we're going to be starting to use that when we're allowed to again. And we also did a beautiful restoration of the pathways and a lot of the monuments at the historic Pioneer Cemetery, which is located kind of across from Auburn Sport and Marine and the Fred Meyer. Recently got that accomplished. And we're also working with the museum on marketing their new education space with both the school district and other groups who want to use that space across from the senior center and adding it to our group of spaces that the public can rent throughout our system. In our maintenance division, we're expanding our Adopt a Park program. It's been kind of quiet, and we've got a few groups that have been doing that. With the increase in the number of parks and spaces we have, we continue to rely on volunteers and service clubs to keep our parks looking good. So we're going to expand our marketing on that, as well as developing a maintenance plan for the 104th Street property along the river, Green River, that we're going to be developing in 2021, the resource plan for that space. Those are our main highlights. Regarding the budget highlights, you'll see that there's no change in the budget in 2021. And then there is a change of 2.6% increase, 364,000 in 2022. That's largely an increase in the interfund shared cost allocations, as well as increased funding in our resource navigator position that's grant funded at the senior center. There's also a slight increase in part-time park maintenance to make up for the addition of the park that's going to be along the river. So there's a slight increase there as well, adding that expenditure authority. There's one special revenue fund that's included in the parks budget. It's called the 120 fund. You never hear about it, but it's going to get a second of your time tonight. It's the Recreational Trails Fund, and 0.42, so less than 0.1% of your gas tax, your motor vehicle fuel tax, goes into a special fund for non-motorized things. Each year, the city gets about $7,000. We're up to almost $100,000 in that fund, and the goal is to use that for recreational trails. And we have a grant in right now to the state for the trail that's connecting Game Farm Park to Game Farm Wilderness, as well as some future along the Reddington Levee Trail. So should we be successful with those projects, we can go into these funds as part of our match or to expand those projects. So there's nothing currently planned in there, but I just wanted to make you aware of that small fund. It's 94,000, but it increases about 7,000 a year thanks to people fueling their cars. I think that's everything in our budget. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's very similar to the last 2 years, and I really appreciate the support that we've had over the years for what we do in our department. It's super important. A lot of what we do is money in and then money out, thanks to our program fees, but we sure want to reach our community and continue to provide the good service that I think we've been providing.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Daryl, do you know where we stand currently on our green fees revenues for our 2020 projection now that we're fully open and seem to be very busy out there?
Yes, I met with Chris Morris today because I had a feeling this was going to come up because I couldn't figure out how to get into that last meeting, even though I was there. But I'm super excited to say that after February's snowstorms and 6 weeks of COVID, so being closed almost a month, we were $200,000 behind. And by the end of this month, we're actually going to be slightly ahead of budget. And so miraculous turnaround at the golf course. And I think we can pretty much reach, unless something happens in November, December, I think we're going to be really close to within $100,000 either way of a full revenue at the golf course this year.
That is fantastic. I know we play out there, and
there's a lot of
tee times are the premium sometime because it is so full, and it's nice to see people out there playing.
Yeah.
And also, I just really wanted to thank you for the gold tees and where they're placed, especially on the 11th hole that I've had attempts of birdies a few times, but I've only made par a few times. But you know, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We have the best golf course in the region, and you hear that not only from your deputy mayor, but you hear that from people who play that course when I'm out there asking questions, and people from outside of the city and outside of the area also just love playing at that course. So super job to Chris and all the staff and what you guys are doing out there.
Great, thank you. I'd love to do a presentation next year, the benefits of a golf course beyond golf.
That would be nice.
Councilmember Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Daryl, so can you please tell me what's been happening at the Parks and Rec. I haven't been there in a while. I know it's pretty much closed up, but
yeah, I can. So this summer we did offer camps with the COVID ratios that were allowed. So we had about 200, well, maybe a few more than that. We had camps 8 of the weeks this summer, and we're just starting up right now our virtual fitness. And hopefully in a couple of weeks, we're going to be able to actually open our doors again on an hourly basis, where you would reserve 45 minutes in the fitness room and be able to run our fitness classes back in the gymnasium and the banquet room. So we've done a lot of that. Some of the events like the farmers market have been allowed to go on. Obviously we've continued the same ratio of maintenance, although our parks have never been busier. And so a lot of the duties have been shifted around, and we've converted many of our paper programs into electronic programs now. So we've done a lot of background work for registrations, et cetera, getting ready to start up again, hopefully here in a couple of weeks.
Okay. How is the budget affecting you?
Yeah, well, we turned in a large number of cuts, obviously, because we laid off all of our seasonal and temporaries, which is a lot of our people, but that also equates to a lot of revenues have been lost. You know, rentals are basically at zero, and recreation class revenues are almost at zero after that first quarter of the year. But that's factored into the projections that Jamie has been using throughout this process. And then they show us at a slight, maybe a 25% decrease next year. So we know we're not going to come back in January to 100%, but our goal is to get there as quickly as possible.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Daryl.
You bet.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Hi, Daryl. Great job. And I also love the golf course. I haven't played for a while, though. My question is, you said you're going to have virtual classes. Is there a fee for people to register on those?
Yeah, for some there is, and for some there is not. And at the senior center, most of those are not. And for our fitness programs, like the Zoom classes, there is a fee for those. And those started a couple of weeks ago. And so you can go on our page and register for those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Daryl, this is on page 212 under professional services, but you've budgeted the same amounts in the professional services categories for 21 and 22 as we had in 20. Because we're currently shut down, but what is your projection, especially based on what you presented last night, for increasing programming, shows, and activities at the Auburn Avenue Theater?
Yeah, we left those numbers the same in that they kind of offset potential revenues, which you guys do not see in this budget. And so if we don't have the show, we don't have the expenditure, and we don't have the revenue. So if we won't spend that if we don't do it, but the money is there to give us the authority to do it. I kind of think in the theater, it's going to take a quarter or two to get back to even half a house.
Okay.
I don't have, but we will also watch who we're booking and make sure that we're maximizing what we can do there. But that's one of those lines where we kept our expenditure authority there, but won't spend it if we don't do it, obviously.
Great, thank you.
That.
Okay. Any other questions for Daryl? All right, thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to jump in. That concludes all of our general fund department presentations. We have one internal service fund department that we have on the schedule to listen to tonight. But before I jump into IT, I wanted to do just a quick internal service funds overview. I think we've already talked quite a bit about internal service funds at the beginning of our meeting today, so this should be pretty quick. But just a reminder that the city actually has 6 internal service funds. We have innovation and technology, equipment, rental and replacement, facilities, multimedia, the workers' compensation fund, and insurance funds. or insurance fund. So those are our 6 internal service funds. The cost to run and operate those funds then are reallocated back out to all of the city departments and city funds that use those services. So all of those costs are wholly supported by all the other departments in the city, not necessarily exclusive to the general fund. So all funds that use those services do pay to support those services. 12% of the general fund budget is for internal service funds. So when we were going through each of the department budgets and we were talking about cost increases were mostly attributed to internal service fund increases. It's a result of one of these 6 funds, if not all 6 of the funds, and the cost increases these funds are incurring from 2020 to 2021. So that's my very brief introduction to how the internal service funds get pulled into the general fund. And I'm going to hand the presentation over to Director Travis to talk about his Innovation and Technology Fund.
All right. Can you guys all hear me and see me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So thank you, Jamie. Good evening, Mayor Backus and council members. For the record, I'm David Travis, Director of Innovation and Technology. The IT department is comprised of 18 FTEs. We currently have 3 vacant positions. We are in the process of hiring 2 of those positions currently, and 1 is currently frozen through the end of 2020. On the call with me, I have my Assistant Director, Ashley Riggs. I brought him under the call just to answer any of the details about the interfunds and how those transfers happen. He kind of works directly with finance to get down to some of those details. So if we'd like to have him talk at the end of this, he's there for that. We also oversee IT operations for the City of Pacific and the City of Algona through interlocal agreements. They pay us a monthly fee for those services. My team is responsible for cyber defense, infrastructure, IP routing and switching, mobile device and static hardware management, software contracts and license management, business analysis services, IT project management, geographical information services, including geospatial analysis, and service desk to support all things IT that we provide. In 2019-20, we received and completed approximately 17,000 requests for service, completed 126 IT-related projects, tracked 625 changes to the environment to help ensure stability to all of the services that we provide. For accomplishments in 2019, we increased our security posture by adding enhancements to our inbound and outbound email defense systems. We reduced our needs for elevated privileges at the workstation level and added some autonomous artificial intelligence and sensor probes into the enterprise to monitor user habits and behaviors. We also increased our stability and recoverability posture by working with our partner Data On to implement a Microsoft Azure Stack hyperconverged environment. This allows us to fail over to multiple data centers within our environment in the case of a disaster or outage. 2020, I think right now our biggest accomplishment is we've survived from an IT department. As we all remember, back in the early days of the COVID outbreak, one task that was asked to the IT group was, how do we get everybody in the city at home working? And I think that, you know, within a short amount of time, we were successful at moving most of the city to a remote environment. We added capacity so that we could scale as we move people around. And the one tricky thing in 2020 is we did that. The city had a posture of secure everything from the outside getting in so that we could not have to worry so much about what was inside. But as we started moving all of our employees outside, we took a new posture of securing everything from everywhere, which adds its own challenges. Our goals for 21-22, we plan to keep pushing the city towards a mobile first, cloud first organization so that we can continue to be ready for any future pandemics or disasters. And security and cloud computing will be very much key to our success. So for the most part, there's there's not much else that I want to talk about from an overview of IT. And I know that there's been a lot of questions about allocations and how those things are happening. Should we jump into the questions now, or would you like me to bring on Ashley to discuss those interfunds, especially to council, since that seems to be the bigger question?
Maybe if Ashley is prepared, he could just talk about the 4 categories and how IT tracks their budget and the basis that those get allocated out to each department.
Perfect. Ashley, I think you are ready for that question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Jamie, are you okay if I share my screen? Okay, so let's do.
Do I need to stop sharing mine in order for you to do that?
No, I'll do it. I just want to make sure that's okay with you.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. What I put together here is hopefully a summary that kind of outlines those 4 categories that are in your budget book and what Jamie and David have already mentioned, which is software, hardware, support, and infrastructure. What I have up here is kind of those 4 buckets on how we do our allocations. And then I have a column that represents some examples we can go over, and then the budget for 21, and then the budget for 22. So software, for example, we are budgeted for $1.5 million to spend on software maintenance next year. That is a hefty amount of money, but it's what's required for us to run these particular applications in a city. It's the licensing behind it. So for example, Novus Agenda, we can't put together Novus packets or council packets that get distributed to the public and to you guys and everything without that particular software. The Zoom call that we're on today, Director Tate mentioned Track It and kind of how we track permits and business licenses. Microsoft, every time you guys open up Office and use Word, all of those things require a license. And if we take the totality of all the software we have in the city, we spend about $1.5 million on that. Hardware is similar, but it's obviously the hardware side of things. So the computers, the phones, the monitors, that's not only the purchasing of new ones, but also a replacement plan. So your guys' computers get replaced on a regular cycle. The last thing we want is, you having a computer that's 15 years old that is so slow and doesn't work and it's full of viruses, but we also don't want to get you a new computer every year. There's a balance there. And we've taken an approach that is definitely budget friendly on that approach. Support services. So, the internet, I see a lot of directors sitting in the office right now using the internet to get into the Zoom call. For example, the usage of the copiers, professional services, repairs. We had one a while ago that I thought was interesting. There was a gunshot, and I forget exactly where it was in Auburn, but it shot through a piece of our fiber out in the street, and the fiber goes down. Our connectivity to each other goes down. Well, we have to pay to have someone come out and repair that. That's an example of what you would get on that. And then the infrastructure, David mentioned a lot of things that we're doing, and that is something that's kind of, if you will, behind the scenes, all the different things that we're doing that are behind the scenes. And some of it's, in front. So the wireless internet, all the cameras that you guys mentioned, that whether they're surveillance cameras in, City Hall or out in the streets, all of those kind of things fall within that bucket. So, some of these are going to be just citywide shared cost. And this gets back to what Jamie was talking about, which is, there's roughly, I think it's 482 FTEs in the city. So we take this this 3.178 million, you divide it by 482, that gets you roughly a cost per FTE to have these services. Now, some of these things are going to be citywide. Some of these are going to be based off of your particular usage. So for example, if, and I'm just going to pick on you, Deputy Mayor, because you're first on my screen there. If deputy mayor has a computer, a iPad, an iPhone, and a Surface, he is paying for all of those. Parks is not, right? So some of these things are also based on your usage. So if you use a particular piece of software and someone else doesn't, then that other person doesn't pay for it. If deputy mayor has 4 computers and someone else has 1, that's how you're paying for those things. So roughly speaking, and I didn't put the details on here that that are in your guys' budget books, but this is just kind of a high level. You can see how those 4 categories are broken out and then how we charge back. So like Jamie had said, all of the chargebacks, kind of another way of thinking of that is all of our entire IT budget comes from other sources, whether it's the general fund or wherever it is, to pay for the things that we have. Nothing in our budget is for something new. Otherwise, we'd come to you guys for a budget improvement or a decision package. So everything that you see up here, and you'll notice that we have a lot of drops in dollar amounts in our budget, is simply because we are paying for things that we currently have. And I think that's something to keep in mind as we're looking through this. I also put a note there on the bottom. And again, I threw this together quickly, so forgive me if it's missing something. But this doesn't include like staff expenses. We have interfund transfers too. Like Jamie mentioned earlier, there's multimedia and facilities and other. We have to pay into those ones as well, just like everyone else. And then those non-IT projects, we heard things like, the electronic document routing from legal. We heard things like putting the permits online from community development. And a lot of those projects fall in the IT budget because of that transfer in that we use because they're technology, they need technology support. So that's why you'll see some additional things in there as well. So that's high level, and I don't want to ramble on too much. I just want to make sure that there's some clarity on these 4 buckets, just some examples of what kind of goes in those buckets so we can kind of get oriented with that. And then you can see some rough dollar amounts in 21 and then in 22, just to get a better idea of what that is. And I think it's probably safe to say if you just take that number and kind of divide it by each FTE, you'll get a rough idea of how much it is per group.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Mayor. Ashley, thank you. And I don't need 4 computers, but 2 would be nice.
Sorry for picking on you there.
That's okay. This may not be the place for this, but what is the life cycle of our major software programs? Let's say, for example, accounting software. When do we look at replacement times instead of just maintenance times? Because those are huge expenses to the city. And how do we look at that?
Yeah, so, roughly speaking, and again, I'm kind of giving some rough numbers here, but we have about 150 software applications, if you will, in the city. So that 1.5 million kind of divided by that 150 is to get a rough idea on how much it costs. We, for the most part, do annual contracts. So we are looking at each one of those contracts on an annual basis to see if we can negotiate different rates, to see if the value is there. There's a lot of times, and I can get you a list just this year, for example, or going into 21, excuse me, where we got rid of applications because either we weren't using them, we consolidated with something else, we went with a different vendor. So I would say for the most part, we look at that on an annual basis. Realistically, because we operate on a biennial budget, we're probably looking at every 2 years is when we're, kind of making changes here and there. But anytime that we can negotiate new stuff, look at the value of what we currently have, that's happening at least an annual basis.
Great, thank you. So I'll use the accounting software, for example, again, because that's always a big one. In all of our contracts and all that, I imagine the upgrades are all included with that, or those extra charges when we have to have upgrades?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Most of our annual maintenance agreements very specifically stipulate that question. And when we're doing kind of just what you would consider an upgrade, where we're on version 10, we're going to a version 11, that's usually included in our maintenance. So that's pretty easy. Once we start getting into the words of like migration and things like that, where we're kind of picking up from maybe an older version and going to a completely different thing that they've revamped, there is cost in that. And that's where you'll see in, I put down here this non-IT department projects. We do a pretty good job of staying on top of what those are and budgeting for those. So for example, in the current year that we're in, we are doing a Springbrook upgrade. So Springbrook is what we use for our utility billing. That is a migration. We are actually going to not only upgrade the software itself, but we're going to be migrating to a whole new environment. We're going to be doing a whole new version, all kinds of stuff. That costs money, and that's something that you'll see in our budget to do that. But more often than not, a simple upgrade is included in our maintenance.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Trout Manuel, did you have a question?
No, Mary, he answered it. So thank you very much.
All right, Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Actually, quick question. So as far as server storage is concerned, are we using the cloud or do we have physical servers on site?
So we're kind of in a what you would call a hybrid mode, which means basically both. We do have some storage in our data centers, and then we do have some that's in the cloud. David spoke a little bit about one of our goals being mobility, and so ultimately we need to get things into the cloud to be more mobile, so it's not tied to one of our physical buildings. But we are in that hybrid environment with definitely a push towards the cloud.
So safety concerns comes into play at that point.
Absolutely.
So what are the contingencies for those?
Yeah, and David, feel free to jump in anytime. I don't want to monopolize this at all, but
you're doing a great job. Nicely done.
Yeah. So the reality of it is, with all of the kind of enterprise cloud solutions out there, whether it's a Microsoft one or an Amazon one or whatever it is, they are beyond battle tested on the things that we need as a local city. They have multiple points of redundancy. They have multiple layers of security. They have restore points that are to like the seconds, rather than minutes or hours. They have, and a lot of what we are doing, a lot of our due diligence, and legal and others can speak to this as well, is when we enter into these agreements with these providers, we're definitely checking the boxes that, hey, we own the data, not you. You're not taking our data other places. This data lives in the United States. It does not live in foreign countries that we don't want it to be. So, technology has obviously changed, year to year. I mean, we're talking the last biennial budget, we may have been talking completely different and, well, let's stay away from the cloud. Whereas now we're looking at the cloud as a big part of what we do. So, this infrastructure cost, while I put servers and storage here, I didn't necessarily say anything about being on site. Our servers, for example, a lot of them are no longer physical. We don't have a lot of physical stuff. So a lot of this is the way that IT is moving, the industry is moving, but also where we need to move as a city to be more mobile.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that too, the storage plans that we do for cloud computing, they're all government-based storage plans, which go through extra security scrutiny before any services or features are allowed in those platforms, which gives us one more layer of safety, if you will, when we're looking from a defensive standpoint.
So one of my biggest concerns is this. a few years ago, I think it was Amazon. Their network went down for half a day. I want to say it was 2017, 2016. So what would happen in that case?
So I would say that, all of those disasters that happen in those major cloud providing data centers, they learn quickly and spend millions and millions of dollars to rectify any of those issues. I would also say that, the city itself has had outages that if we were in the cloud, we could have made it easier recovery. But because we were on-prem, we had to deal with those outages. So it can go both ways. If there's stuff in the cloud, there's potential for outages, but you have the same or even higher potential for anything that's in our own data centers. The one kind of way that I look at it is the cloud provider itself has a monetary incentive to keep things running.
Right.
I think that's beneficial to us.
Now, one last question, and I think you might have answered this question, but as far as the storage is concerned, is it kept within the boundaries of the United States?
Yes, yeah. So that's what I was saying. In the government plans, even for like Office 365, we have the government plan, which requires all the data to be to never leave the United States.
Okay, that's good.
Councilmember.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have just a quick question about ransomware. I was just wondering if we got, I guess, figuratively held up for $500,000 or so. That seems to be a common number. How does that get paid? I mean, if we pay it, does that come out of insurance, or does that come out of our city budget or out of IT? I'm just curious.
Yeah, and the way that it typically would work is as soon as we had some sort of ransomware attack that took over system, we would probably contact HR and risk, and we would work with our insurance provider to give us a stance on how we should do it or what we should do. And of course, any of those types of intrusions, we immediately kick off our continuity of operations plans so that we can, contact the FBI, contact police. Because even on some of those ransomware, the thing that people don't understand is the FBI sometimes has the keys to unlock it. And then you see organizations that'll pay the ransom, and typically it's because of a vanity type thing. They don't want people to know. They just want to pay it and get away with it, and nobody knows. But the trend is they pay it and then they don't open the keys, and now they got to keep paying it, and you already paid it. Now you got to get the FBI involved anyway. For those payments, it would definitely be we would work with the insurance company first and risk.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Jamie, did you have any final comments?
Just to wrap up to this evening's meeting, actually, and to kind of give you a brief preview for tomorrow. We will wrap up with, I've got several follow-up items that I've taken note of, so we'll make sure that I either get that information sent out to you or we address those questions at the beginning of our meeting tomorrow. We'll finish up reviewing the other 5 internal service funds at the beginning of the meeting. We'll review the general governmental fund capital, and then we'll look at the proprietary funds, and then a couple of the miscellaneous funds that they don't have very much activity in them, but we will still review them because they are in your book 2. And then we will talk next steps for budget adoption and the public hearing process. So with that, that concludes this evening, unless anybody else has any other questions.
Council, any final questions this evening for the presentations? that you have heard? All right, seeing and hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.